Hello and welcome to this edition of Mentor Box. I'm Jonathan Kendall. We're here with some of our team members and Annie Duke. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate
Thanks.
it. So we just got finished shooting up a great workshop on this incredible book. So obviously look inside the online portal and take a stab at it. Also get the book right away. But while we had you here, we hope that you could give us a little bit of lesson on your former expertise, I guess, which you're still probably world class at it. A little bit about poker.
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to just start with the basics, which a lot of people might already know. So if that's the case, then just skip ahead.
Okay.
But you have to know the basics to get to sort of the interesting collision of decision stuff and poker, and thinking about poker as a decision exercise. So the basics of most poker games are that you're trying to make a 5-card hand. And in order, they go from best to worst. A straight flush, well, you would have a royal straight flush, which starts with an ace, then a straight flush, then 4 of a kind, then a full house, then a flush, a straight, 3 of a kind, 2 pair, 1 pair, and then what you would call high card, which is none of your 5 cards are paired, and you're just going by what the highest card in the hand is. So you can find all of that kind of stuff online. The form of poker that you see most often on television is called Texas Hold'em. And the way that works is that you're trying to make a 5-card hand out of a combination of 7 cards, 2 of which are private to you, and 5 of which end up in the center, which are called community cards, for everybody to use. So the idea is you would have your 2 private cards, so these are hidden from view from everybody but you. There'd be a round of betting, so you would be making a bet on whether you think this hand has enough potential, that it's worth your while to play. And then there would be 3 cards that would come down in the middle. That's called the flop. There'd be another round of betting. Then there's a 4th card, otherwise known as the turn or 4th street. And then there would be a 5th card, which is the river, or 5th street. And then with your 2 cards, these 2 cards happen to be very bad, you would try to make the best combination of 5. And in Texas Hold'em, that could be anywhere from just the 5 cards that are on the board to the 2 in your hand and 3 off the board, or 1 from your hand and 4 off the board. So that's just super simple. There's a lot of sites where people can go to get these basics and get a fuller view of them. So what I'm more interested in is what are the really important decisions during a hand of poker. So let's start with the one that's the most important, and it's actually the one that most people mess up. Here is the thing that's true about poker and about life. Very often, when we're asking about a decision, it turns out that the decision we're asking about actually wouldn't have occurred, like that event wouldn't be coming up against us if we had made a better decision earlier. So what I found in poker all the time is someone would ask me about something that occurred on, say, the turn or the river on the last card where they had some decision, where I'd want to back them up and say, but wait a minute, how did you get into that spot in the first place where you even had that decision to make? I'll give you an example where someone says, it was really icy and I didn't know what to do because I started skidding, and you should probably ask the question first of, if you knew it was icy, why were you out on the road? Right, so they're very worried about, should I turn into the skid or away, where I would be asking, like, should you have been in that situation in the first place? So that happens in Texas Hold'em a lot, and all poker a lot. And it all goes back to this first decision that you have to make. You get dealt 2 cards, and the question is, should you play those? And very often, the choice that we make at that moment about whether we play the hand or not is what gets us into trouble later. So I'm going to give a simple basic about what you should play, and it all comes down to this. In a game of Texas Hold'em, if you and I were to get to the end of a hand, the most common hand that would actually win the pot is only 1 pair. Now remember, I went through this whole list of hands from top to bottom, which included straight flushes and full houses and all this stuff. And the second to the last was 1 pair. So it's not a particularly strong hand in the whole scope of things that tends to win. Now, but what that tells you is that you should be looking at your hand through the lens of, would I be happy if I only made a pair with this hand? Okay? Because what people do is they look at their cards and they think about stuff like this. So these 2 cards, you notice, are the same suit. So you could make a flush with them. And people get very, very excited because they're like, oh, look at how pretty those are. They match and aesthetically very pleasing. And they're thinking about how wonderful it will be when they make a flush. But remember, I said a flush is really far away from one pair. I don't think I'm going to be very happy with a pair of 5s, or I'm not going to be particularly happy with a pair of 10s. So once you start sort of like putting blinders on and thinking about your hand as what if I only had a pair, then you start viewing your hand really differently, and it helps you to really make a much better decision. So here's a really simple rule of thumb. And a lot of people play blackjack, right? So in blackjack, what's a hand where the dealer would pay you blackjack?
So ace, king, ace, queen, ace, jack, ace, 10.
Right. Okay, so kind of throw the ace 10 out for a second. But an ace and a face, which is a great blackjack hand, is actually a pretty good hand in poker. Why? Well, think about it again through this idea of what if I make a pair, right? So we can take an ace and a king here. So if you make a pair of aces, you have the best possible pair that you could have, and you have the best possible other card with it, right? If I make a pair of kings, I have the second best pair that I could have, and by definition, because I haven't paired the ace, I have the best pair that's available on the board, and I've got a really good card with it. So this is a hand where when you do improve it and you match one of these two cards, it's a really good match, right? And that's true with it in ace, a queen, and ace and a jack. You're at the top end of the deck when you're pairing up. Okay, so that's rule number 1, is think about hands that pay you blackjack in the game of blackjack, right? Now, another thing is think about hands that are super likely to win in blackjack. So those would be hands that make 20, right? So a 10 and a 10, a king and a queen is pretty good, a king and a jack is pretty good. You don't want to go too low down, so like a jack and a 10 isn't going to be so great. But as long as you're kind of on the upper end with eyes on the cards, that's pretty good. And then the other hands that tend to be pretty good in blackjack are pairs, right? So would you be happy if you got dealt 2 aces every single hand in blackjack? Yeah, you get to split them, and you're
it's a good
right.
start.
So this is the best possible hand in poker, right? So aces, kings, queens, jacks, 10s, 9s, 8s, those are all really strong hands. So again, if we go back to, well, normally you end up with a pair. Well, when you start off with a pair, you have a pair. So you're pretty happy with that. So one of the things that I like to try to explain to people is that a lot of the reason why they get sad is because they'll get caught up in one of these hands, like a 10 and a 9 of the same suit. And they'll think, well, these can make a lot of really wonderful things. This isn't a very good blackjack hand, by the way. And then what happens is they make a pair of 9s or they make a pair of 10s, and they're kind of sad. So think about, like, pretty good hands in blackjack also happen to be pretty good hands in Texas Hold'em. And what's really important about that initial decision that you're making is that that determines the probability that you're going to win. Okay, so that's thing number 1. Thing number 2 to recognize in poker is that 70% of the time, the 2 cards that you start with don't match the 3 cards that end up on the board initially. So I can kind of show you that pretty easily. Like, we can see sort of what happens here. So those are 3 random cards, right? So I was betting that they weren't going to match. Why? Because I know 70% of the time they won't. So this is a big favorite to happen. So you can see I did not set that up. You saw me shuffle the cards. I put 3 cards out there, and it has nothing to do with this hand, right? Okay, so that brings us to the next really important thing of poker, is that normally when we're playing, it's a battle of who wins when we don't match. Because I know that if I'm playing a hand of poker with you, 70% of the time I'm not going to match the board, but also 70% of the time you're not going to match the board. So the question is, do I get to win on the 70% of the time that you don't match, or do you get to win on the 70% of the time that I don't match? And that's so much about what the battle at a poker table is who wins when nobody has anything. Because most of the time, I don't have anything or you don't have anything, right? Okay, so how does that happen? It has to do with the way that you use your chips. I'm going to move my book out of the way for a second. I'm going to put it over here. I'm going to put it over here. Okay, next to the money. Oh, yeah, that's a good place. So there's a dealer, right? So you're the dealer. So that's just like as if you were dealing the cards, right? And then you have to put in bets without looking at your cards. Okay, so I'm just putting these in front of you guys. Well, that would actually be in front of me, in front of you. Okay. So here's the thing about this game, is that people don't quite get that these chips right here are a way to have a conversation. Because when you're putting chips in the pot, they should be used to ask other people questions. And those questions should be good. So if you look at your hand and you decide this is a hand I want to play, it's a pretty good blackjack hand, so I'm going to play this hand in poker. What most people's instinct is to match this bet that you put in. So this bet goes in without him looking at it. Okay? So if you match that bet, remember he's got 2 cards that are face down, right? I've got 2 cards that are face down. You have 2 cards that are face down. You have 2 cards that are face down. So none of us can see each other's cards. This is all hidden information. Okay? If you match this bet that he has out here when you decide to play, have you asked him anything, to do anything?
No.
So when he continues in the hand, do you know anything about his cards that you didn't already know before? So you've asked a poor question, which is no question at all. So the goal is, because we've got this hidden information problem in poker, that what we're trying to do is to get these cards to start to turn face up to us in order to start to get them to, not literally turn, figuratively. To start to be able to narrow down what he has, you have to be a good question asker. In order to be a good question asker, you need to ask him to do something where he has to be selective. So how do you do that? Well, you can raise. So let's say that instead of just matching the bet, you did that. Okay? Now you would have a choice. You would have a choice about whether to actually put that much money in. Okay, so now if he puts that much money in, he sees that you've put extra money in, and he does that as well, and he matches you, do you know something about his hand now that you didn't know before?
He's answered my question.
Right, so what do we know about his hand now?
He's confident in it, perhaps.
Right. So you have to know for you what that is, like what are the things that he would be confident about. But what you know is that whatever the sort of trashier end of the range is for him, he does not have that. Right? There's another thing that you know as well, which is that he did not up the bet against you. Okay? So you also know that he probably doesn't have the really, really good end of the range either. So notice that we've knocked out, not all the time, because some people play a little, are unpredictable, but assuming that he's an average player, we've knocked out the whole bottom range of the hands that he could have, and we've also knocked out the top range of the hands that he could have, all with that one bet. Right? So there are 2 biggest mistakes that people make in poker that I'm not going to stop you from doing. One is they aren't selective enough to start. Right? So a lot of people are like, oh, I want to see what comes out. And there's a saying in poker, well, any 2 can win. And the answer is that is true. Any 2 cards could eventually win a hand, but not enough of the time to be profitable. That's the part that gets left off of that aphorism, the any 2 can win aphorism. And a trap that a lot of people fall into, actually, is that they'll fold their 2 cards, and then at the end of the hand, when the 5 cards come out, their hand would have won if they had played. And so then they feel this deep sense of regret, and they'll start playing hands like that in the future to avoid the regret. And what I say to those people is, well, you can avoid regret by playing every single hand that you're dealt, all the way to the end, because then it will never happen that you have a hand that would have won, that you threw away, but you will be broke. So, choose what your values are. But at any rate, so the first big mistake that people make is they're not selective enough with the 2 cards that they choose to start playing. And the second mistake that they make is they don't ask a question with their chips. They just call along. And if you call along, you're not revealing anything about your opponent's cards, and you're never giving them an opportunity to fold. Which means that the only way that you can win is by actually making the best hand, which is not a way to win in poker. You have to give them an opportunity to go away or to sometimes fold the worst hand. So those are my 2 big tips.
Okay, great. You want to do a couple rounds just to see how you would analyze it?
Okay. Should I just be the dealer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it.
All right, so that means I'm going to give everybody a stack of chips here.
I mean, you can tell us afterwards what we did incorrectly.
Right. So with 3 people, it's a little harder because it's really different than with a lot of people at the table, but, we'll see how this goes. So I'm going to give you some chips here.
How many games of poker do you think you played?
Oh my God, I don't even. It's thousands.
Like 100,000?
I would have to go through and do the estimate. I don't know. I mean, a lot. I mean, you play about 1,000 hours a year usually.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So 18,000 hours of poker. I don't know. Okay, so you're going to put out $5, and you're going to put out 10, and you're not going to do anything yet.
Just me.
Because you're the dealer.
What is this called?
All right, so these are called the blinds. So pretty much every form of poker involves an ante. And this would be considered an ante. They always want you to put money in, at least some of the people at the table to always be putting money in without looking, because it stimulates action at the table. It makes you have something at risk immediately.
Yeah. What is that red card in the bottom?
Okay, so this stops anybody from being able to see what the bottom card is, because that would obviously, if you peek the bottom card, you would know one card that wasn't going to come out on the middle of the table. So that's really important. So like, say that you got dealt 2 5s in your hand and you saw that this bottom card was a 5, that's such an important card for your hand that you would easily fold it, right? So you put this, is called a shoe. And so you put this on the bottom to stop any from being able to see. Okay, so you get to choose first. Now wait, I just want to tell you guys, when there's only 3 people playing at the table, you should be playing a lot more than just your good blackjack hands. Because you don't have to have as good a hand to win, because there's fewer cards that are competing against you, right? So you can play a lot more hands in this case, but you should also be stepping the aggression up.
So do we look at our cards?
Yes, but don't show me. Oh, so here's the other thing. I'm going to take these other cards. So this is a really important thing that a lot of people do wrong. So one of the things about poker is there's this hidden information element, right? So there's cards face down. So you want to make sure that your cards are face down to everybody at the table. So it really matters how you look at your cards, okay? So most people are under the mistaken impression that you need to see the whole card to know what it is, right? But actually, what you can see, so you see that? That's all that you need to see of the card in order to be able to see it. So that's really helpful, because most people's instinct at a table is to lift the cards up. Yeah. Now, if I lift the cards up, you very easily, without even leaning over, might see what my cards are. That's really bad. So the way to actually look at them so that other people can't see them is you can think about horse blinders, and you put this hand here, and you put this hand here, and all you do is with your right thumb pick up the corner of the card. So put them this way. Sorry. Put them horizontally. So your right hand is here, and with your left thumb, pick that bottom corner up. Can you see the card?
I can.
And you know what it is, and you've looked at just like 2% of the whole card, right?
Yes.
Right. So now notice what happens is that there, your cards are tented, so that it's just very hard for anybody to see them, right? And the thing is that what I've experienced in my life is that when someone's looking like this, you can be trying really hard to not see them, but they just hold it up, and it's like in your peripheral vision. So you have to sort of go like this not to be able to see. Why are you putting yourself through that? Because you want to keep your cards hidden. Here's how you protect your cards to make sure that they're hidden from everybody's view but your own. You put your 2 cards like this. You take your right hand on the right side of the cards, and then your left hand goes on the left side. You take the right corner of the bottom card up, and you look at that, and then you take the right corner of the top card up, and you look at that. And what you'll be able to see there is, this is called the index right here, and then this tells you what the suit is. So you don't need all this information on the card to know what it is. You just need to be able to see the index and the suit. So when I pull that little corner up like that's what I'm seeing, and that's enough. And that means that because you're like this, you've tented it, and you've only exposed this tiny little part of the card that it would be very hard for anyone to see. So that's how you protect your hand. And it's super important to protect your hand in poker. Okay, so he's doubling the bet to 4 chips, to $20. Okay, that's 85 from Tyler. Okay, so you want to match that? There you go, take 2, right. Okay, so all 3 of you are in this pot. Now, here's the next thing. I'm going to do what's called burning a card. Remember you asked about that card? So the other thing is when you're playing poker in a casino is they take this top card and they slide it over there under the deck. Why? Just in case somebody at the table has done something to put a mark on the card, this card gets shunted out of play. So this comes from the old days of like the old West, when people would do more unscrupulous things, which hopefully doesn't happen anymore, but at any rate, it goes under there. So that's called the burn card. Okay, so you are going to go first once I get this flop down here. So this is the first 3 cards, a jack, an 8, and a 3 with 2 clubs. Okay, check. Okay, 100. Okay, he's calling 100. Okay, folding. Okay. Okay, Tyler, you're first.
Another 100.
Okay, 100. Okay. So now we can go through and look at the cards, right?
Oh, but no. I have to, right?
Yeah. Put the pencil right here. Okay.
Tricky.
Okay, so let's start with this. Okay, so when you first started off, here's the most important thing, and this is true of decision making in life. If you can't remember or recreate the sequence of actions or the data, you're not going to get good fidelity answers as to whether your decisions were good. So you guys haven't practiced, so you don't have like a framework within to remember all this stuff. But hopefully in whatever you're doing in your life, where you're trying to work with other people to get help with your decisions, you've got a really good framework for remembering what the appropriate information is. So as an example, you should know exactly what every single bet was on every single point that there was a decision point. One of the things that we always want to be able to do is recreate the pot, right? So we want to be able to recreate all the actions. So I'm going to take the pot back. So if you remember, you started off by making it 20, right? You had 10 out, you had 5 out. Okay, so this is a bet. I like the idea of the raise, but it's not that big a question that you asked Tyler, because all he has to do is match it, and it's only the same amount that he already has in there. So the first thing is, a good rule of thumb is when you make this opening gambit, right, when you make this raise, to try to go about 3 times what that bet is. And if you do that, you're just asking kind of a bigger question. So the instinct to raise was great. It just would have been good if you raised a little bit more than that. Okay, so now you decided to call here. And this is actually a problematic call. And the reason is that these 2 cards, the queen and the 5, don't bear any relation to each other. So one of the things that you want to think about is that you want your cards to be working together. And these cards are basically working in isolation, right? If you make a 5, you're not going to be particularly happy. If you make a queen, you're not going to be particularly happy. They don't match in suit. You can't make a straight with them. So basically, they're playing with 2 cards and you're playing with 1 card. That puts you at a real disadvantage. And so this is a hand that you would have folded at this point. Okay. Then what did you do with this hand?
I put.
Right, and you took this back, right? Okay,
yes,
so
that.
right. So I pulled that out of the pot, so we're going to put that there. Okay, so you now made it 65. You called, which is you made it 85. You called, which is great. I totally don't mind that at all. You could even re-raise with this hand, but calling, you're certainly not going to fold. Now you compounded with another mistake. This is a hand that you shouldn't have played in the first place. And now what you did was call also. Okay? So again, your cards aren't working together, and so now you've made a second mistake on top of the first. Okay, so what's important here is to know what's in the pot, because you want to track the money as you go along, right? So we know that that's 225, 250, 255. Okay, so now the 3 cards come down in the middle, right? You checked. I like the choice. Do you remember what you did?
Yeah, I put 100 in.
Right. Okay, so now you can see why I did that. Okay, so here's the thing with that bet is it's a little bit on the small side. Okay, so one of the things we want to do is always keep querying good questions. So you're going to be thinking always about the return on investment in the same way that like someone who's doing venture capital is going to think about that. So you can imagine that you're willing to take a much riskier choice if the payoff is much bigger. And that's true in poker as well. So notice that you've bet under even half of what's in this pot, right? So there's 255 in here and you've only bet 100, putting it 355 to you. And so that allows you a little bit more wiggle room to sort of chase the pot around a little bit, right? Because you're going to get a relatively big return. So rule of thumb is when you bet, you always want to be betting to a point where you're making the other person still make a decision, which means you want it to be, a good rule of thumb would be about 60% of the pot. If you stay between 60 and 75% of the pot, and that's all that you ever did in terms of your choice of bet, and you didn't think of anything else, it was just, if I want to bet, I have to bet that much, you would do pretty well. As you become more of an expert, you would vary your bets for other reasons around there. But if all you're doing is keeping it at about 60% of the pot, you're actually not going to be doing that badly in terms of your bet sizing. Right? Okay, so you bet 100, you decided to call. I don't mind that much because you don't really know that much about his hand yet, and he did make what looks like a pretty weak bet. You could have actually even raised here if you wanted to bluff. You can call and try to win it on the next card. Okay? Then, obviously, the queen comes, you now bet, and you appropriately fold. But you could have chosen to bluff, whatever. And your bet is fine. Continuing to bet, he hasn't shown you a lot of strength. You have ways to win, even if you're wrong, because you could hit a flush or a straight. So that was all really good. Now, here's my question for you. Having folded the queen and the 5, and now you see these hands exposed, are you sad?
Emotionally, yes. Logically, no.
That's a very good answer. Right, so this is actually the biggest trap that people who play poker fall into, is in the end, they kind of see these hands and they go, God, I would have won. Why didn't I play that hand? And I try to tell people, like, that's the equivalent to you get drunk one night, you get in a car, you drive home, you happen not to die, and you think, wow, that's a thing I should repeat again. So look, anything can happen, right? You can drive drunk and get home safely. You could drive totally sober and get in a car accident. So yeah, this is like driving drunk in poker, and you can get home safely and hit the queen and happen to win against these two hands, right? But the thing is that not in the long run. In the long run, this is going to be really bad for you. And the only way to avoid the kind of regret that you have when you do hit the queen is to continue to play this hand, even though mathematically it's a big loser. So yeah, you're going to avoid regret, but you're going to go broke in the process. So anyway, so you would have won. I'm just going to drive the stake into the heart.
No, it's okay. I understand the theory.
Yes.
Is there a question I have? You've referenced the fact that we're playing with 3 people, so
Right.
You're doing the odds a little bit. It's okay because there's only 3 people.
Yeah.
So at a poker table, there's potentially how many? 8?
So, I mean, I've seen poker tables with 11 at them. Normally, there's 9.
Okay.
But
And
you see
what
10
does
a
that
lot.
change?
You see 10 a lot. Okay, so what that changes is what the probability is that somebody has actually connected with the board in some significant way. So what you can think about is that if you're only against one player, 30% of the time you know he's going to connect with this board. But now you have 2 players who each 30% of the time, and then 3 players and 4 players and 5
It's like the
players.
birthday problem in statistics.
Exactly.
Or
It
only
is.
takes about 30 people in the room for 2 people to have the same birthday.
Right, exactly. So what happens is that as you add more people into the table, the strength of your own hand has to rise along with it. So you would actually enter fewer pots, and the strength of the hand that you would want to have would also have to increase. So you're just much less likely to be able to win without the best hand when there's a lot more players at the table, because and so in order for me to win without the best hand, and you can see this here, in order for Tyler to win without the best hand here, he needed to be against somebody who also sort of wasn't connected to the board, who was very weak. As you add more players into the table, the chances that somebody is weak enough to be able to get them to fold go down because there's more players there to connect with the board. So a simple way to think about it is that the more cards that are out against me, the higher the likelihood is that I'm going to lose the hand, which means that my selectiveness about the hand that I play must go up, right? The fewer cards that are out against me, the more chance that I can win without the best hand or with a weaker hand, or that kind of thing. So, you know, a lot of what the game of Hold'em is figuring out how to win when you don't have the best hand. And that's just harder to do when there's 10 people at the table.
Is there a method of bluffing that's most effective that you found?
So essentially the method of bluffing that's the most effective is when you're playing the hand in the same way that you would play a hand that was really good. So I would say that the biggest mistake that people make in bluffing is that they do something that doesn't make sense in terms of the story that you would tell. So here's an example. Let's say that you guys were playing along and you weren't really doing very much. He was betting and you were calling, and he was betting and you were calling. Then all of a sudden on this last card, a 2 comes down and you bet, and all of a sudden you pushed all your chips in. Mm-hmm. This is not a story that makes very much sense because this 2 of hearts didn't change really very much about what the possible hands were. It's not related to the king of diamonds or the 8 of clubs or the jack of diamonds or the 3 of clubs. It didn't complete some sort of flush. It didn't complete some sort of straight. So how come you weren't doing something already? Mm-hmm. What on earth did this 2 do that all of a sudden made it so you were so excited about your hand, right? So that would be, if he were to bluff here when the 2 came, that would be a pretty bad time to bluff because it doesn't really make any sense in terms of the story of the hand, because it doesn't really do anything to the board. Now, if he's calling along, and then all of a sudden the 6 of diamonds comes, and now you do something spectacular. In this case, you wouldn't be bluffing, but let's ignore that. Now all of a sudden something spectacular happens. You know, he can't see the cards, and you're bluffing. Now it makes a little bit more sense for you to have suddenly decided that you liked your hand, because now something did change about the board, and it was really something significant that changed about the board. So I would say that that's the biggest mistake, is sometimes people will sort of just randomly bluff. So the best time to bluff is under 2 conditions. One is when your bluff tells the story of a very strong hand. That's number 1. And number 2, when it makes sense that your opponent is weak enough to fold. So that's the other problem. If your opponent is giving you a lot of resistance, you should probably give up on the bluff. So sometimes what I'll see is people will sort of decide at the beginning of the hand, like, I'm going to bluff. And even though their opponent is resisting the bluff, they just continue to keep playing along. It's like hitting your head against a wall, right? And they just don't want to stop. And then all of a sudden, their money is gone because they've just sort of gone down that road. So that's the other thing, is understanding that when your opponent is telling you to stop, very often it means you should stop.
Yeah, because they're kind of excited. They're thinking, great,
Right.
I have Jack 8 in my hand, and I'm confident that I'm gonna win. If this person wants to continuously
Right.
give me more money, no big deal. And then you're thinking that you're being this great bluffer, when in
Exactly.
fact you're just setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly. And then there's a third thing that I would say in terms of bluffing, is that sometimes when people start playing, they're actually very tentative about bluffing. It's very scary to put a lot of chips in the pot when you don't have anything. That's hard for a lot of people to do. So one of the things that I suggest when people are just starting out, in order to get their feet wet in terms of understanding bluffing, is to actually bluff in exactly Tyler's situation here. So notice that Tyler, while he couldn't win the pot if it stopped right now, because you don't have anything yet, you have potential because you have 4 clubs, and so you could make a flush. So this is what we would call a semi-bluff, because it's a partial bluff. Yes, at the moment you don't have anything and you require better cards to come, but they could come. And one of the things that's really important is that if you're bluffing, you want to look comfortable, because people with really strong hands look comfortable. So very often when people are new to the game and they're bluffing, they look really uncomfortable. Well, when you actually do have more of a semi-bluff, where you could make something, then people tend to relax into it and get some comfort with it, and it makes it a little bit easier to bluff to start. So in terms of getting your feet wet on the bluffing side, very often choosing these semi-bluffs, hands that could make something, even if they're not good right now, is a better way to kind of get started with figuring out how it feels.
Is bluffing easier when there's only two people?
So bluffing is much easier when there's only two people. So actually, I'm so happy that you asked that question. Remember, I said that one of the things that you want to do when you enter a pot is, instead of calling, you want to raise the bet so that I can start asking you a question, and I can start getting your cards to figuratively start turning face up so that I can narrow down the cards that you might have. But the other thing that raising does is it gets people to go away. It gets people to fold. Because exactly to the point and the question that you asked, you would vastly prefer to be against one person. And the reason is that same reason that you asked about why are you playing more hands when it's 3 players instead of 10? And it's because when there's 10 players, there's a lot more cards out against you, which means that it's very hard to bluff and the quality of your own hand has to raise. Well, if I am at a table with 9 players, I'd like to figure out how to get against only one. And the way that I do that is by opening with a raise in order to chase people out of the pot. Once I've done that, now it's like you and me, and now remember, we're back to that battle for the 70. Right? So I'm trying to always be getting into the battle for the 70% so that I can then push you out of the pot when you don't make anything.
It totally makes sense. Any other secret weapons that you've learned?
What about some tells when you can figure out if somebody's bluffing? Little signs
Sure.
like that.
So, you know what? I saw a video that you guys had up from a body language expert. Yeah?
Could be Amy Cuddy, Presence.
It might have been. I think that might have been who it was from. So this is all body language stuff. So if you read a book on body language, you're going to know a whole lot about tells. Because what she talks about is what are the signs of comfort versus what are the signs of discomfort. So I remember she was talking about, for example, when you're talking to somebody, leaning in and moving your shoulder toward them is a really good thing to do. It's very inviting. So what you can think about is at the poker table, you're going to get the same kind of behaviors, and it's going to tell you how much do they like their hand versus how much do they not like their hand. So when somebody is bluffing, they tend not to be inviting you in. So when you get this kind of like leaning forward behavior, that usually means they're pretty comfortable with their hand, right? So there's other things that people do. For example, when you get an extended blink, it's called hooding. It usually means they don't like their hand. There's all sorts of self-comforting behaviors that you'll see. So when people are uncomfortable, because people tend to be very uncomfortable with bluffing, you'll see, for example, they might rub their finger. They might be licking the inside of their mouth in some way, like that. They might be pursing their lips. There's all these things that they'll do. They might rub their leg. That they'll do to sort of show comfort. But all the things that are sort of, open, inviting body language, that generally means that they like their hand pretty much. And then there's one really fun one, which is tail wagging. So we don't have tails, but we have legs. So when you see someone going like this, and it's like a happy dog. Now, what I just want to say is like, the thing about all the body language stuff, and this is true out in the real world as well, is that you have to know what someone's baseline is. So some people's baseline is that when they're not in a hand, they're pursing their lips or licking their lips or, doing things because in general, they're just nervous. So I remember, this is one of the stories that I tell that's a real cautionary tale for this. I was playing in a game with somebody and I had just sat down to the table and they put their chips in and they were shaking, like they were really shaking. And that would be a sign that they were very, like it was clear to me that they were very excited about their hand. So they were shaking as they put their chips in the pot. And so like I folded a hand that was pretty good because it felt to me like this was clear. Now I had just sat down at the table. And then what I noticed is every single hand they were shaking as they went in. So so it actually wasn't even relevant information. It's just I didn't know because it was the first piece of information that I had. So one of the things you want to know is maybe someone's just a leg shaker, right? Maybe someone's a lip purser in general. Maybe someone is a leaner in general. So always make sure that you're getting people's baselines and then always be looking for things that are moving off the baseline.
Yeah. So just to wrap up everything that I learned and see where I missed something, but generally speaking, when you get your first 2 cards, make sure that you kind of only use this little corner here
Yep.
and hood everything
Yep.
so that people don't see what you have. And then make sure that you're kind of thinking a good blackjack hand is basically the same thing as a good poker hand.
But not one that you double down on.
Yeah.
I don't want people to play an 8 and a 3.
Yeah, totally,
Just
totally.
to be clear.
Yeah, and then you said be a little bit more aggressive with your first bets. Actually ask a question. So rather than just kind of going along for the ride,
Yep.
get some information from every single person at the table.
Think of
much
these as
possible.
information gathering tools.
Yeah,
So you must use them in that way. Exactly.
yeah. And then always be paying attention to how much is in the pot. So what you might think intuitively is a powerful bet, especially to a real poker player, is not actually a powerful bet because they're doing the calculation in their head. They think, oh, that's a 5-1, that's great.
Yep.
So they might match. So be a little bit more aggressive and say, you said 60% of the
Yep.
pot?
If all you do is
generally
60%
speaking?
of the pot, you will be in good
Yeah,
stead.
60 to 75%. And then when someone raises and you're going to then re-raise, you said oftentimes kind of triple it
Yep.
to get that information again from them.
Exactly.
And then when we're bluffing, there's some obvious physical tells, like when they're kind of happy or leaning in, things that when we're communicating with a human being and they're thinking, you feel like you're connecting, that means oftentimes that they have a good hand. And when
Yep.
they're a little bit more uncomfortable and nervous, then it probably means that either they're bluffing or maybe they don't have a good hand.
Right.
We also talked about how when there's 8 to 10 people at the table, then you better have a better hand
Yep.
or get it down to 2 people as quickly as possible. Whereas if you have only 2 or 3 people that you're playing with, you can be a little bit looser because you only have, you said, about a 30% chance of matching, correct?
Right. You only have about a 30% chance of matching.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Was there anything else that I missed?
I gotta say, that was a hell of a distillation of a lot of stuff that I said. That was super impressive.
Oh, okay.
Like, no,
Well,
for real. Like, I think for a lesson that I gave, that might have been the best playback that I've ever seen. That was really good.
Oh, okay. Well, I just wanted to summarize everything for the viewers before we let.
Right, and that was a really good summary.
Okay. Well.
What he said.
Yeah. So thanks for coming in, and obviously everyone get the book right away and pre-order if you're watching it before it comes out, and if you are watching this lesson after it comes out, then get it.
Yeah.
It's an incredible book. You can find the full lesson in the MentorBox online portal. Annie Duke, thank you very much for coming in. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Cheers.
Thanks, guys. He's gonna crush you in the long run, because that was really good.
Yeah.
All right, I want to do one fun thing. Everybody give a poker nickname right now. Wait, hold on. Wait for Alex to pass through. All right, poker nicknames.
Wait, can I give him a poker nickname because
Yeah.
of what he just did?
Yeah.
Okay, you'd be the gister.
The gist.
The gister, because you just gisted my lesson like so well. So you're the gister.
Yeah.
Deontay.
Just give me a nickname.
I'll call you. Let's see.
Deontay the Hat.
The hat.
The Hat.
The hat.
The hat. I like that. That's
The
kind
hat.
of that's
The hat.
cool.
You're the hat. Tyler.
I'm gonna go with either smiley or shaky because one of those things is gonna happen every hand I play. I'm not confident in my cards ever.
Can I say that there's a lot of poker players who end up getting named by where they're from? So you could be like Boston Tyler.
Okay. Yeah, Nick the Greek from the book.
Right, exactly. So you actually get a lot of like
Boston
naming from
Tyler.
where you are.
I'm Boston Tyler.
Deontay the hat.
I'm just Annie Duke. I don't do nicknames.
I'm the gister.
The gister. I love that.